Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies, 1945, is a seminal work in political philosophy that defends liberal democracy, the rule of law, and individual freedoms while criticizing totalitarian ideologies. The book is widely regarded as one of the most important works of the 20th century, addressing the political implications of scientific inquiry and philosophy of history, with a particular focus on the dangers of ideologies that seek to impose absolute truths. Context and structure of the work. Popper wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies in the aftermath of World War II, during a time when totalitarian regimes, particularly those of Hitler's Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union, were casting long shadows over Europe. The work is a critique of the philosophical foundations that, according to Popper, laid the groundwork for these dangerous systems, specifically the ideas of Plato, Hegel, and Marx. The book is divided into two main volumes: The Spell of Plato and The High Tide of Prophecy, Hegel, Marx, and the Aftermath. In the first volume, Popper focuses on Plato's philosophy and its implications for political theory. In the second, he addresses the ideas of Hegel and Marx, examining how their theories, though distinct, share the common feature of advocating for historical determinism and collectivist ideals that Popper argues undermine individual freedom and democracy. The Open Society Definition and Importance. The concept of the open society is central to Popper's work. For Popper, an open society is one in which individuals have the freedom to express their ideas, critique authority, and pursue their own paths to happiness. It contrasts sharply with closed societies, which are characterized by rigid, authoritarian control, where dissent is suppressed, and where political or social change is stifled. An open society, as Popper describes it, is a society that is tolerant, democratic, and built on the idea that human beings should be allowed to change their minds, challenge prevailing ideologies, and adapt to new information. It is a society that values the individual and seeks to minimize coercion. Popper argues that societies that value freedom of thought and expression are more likely to innovate, evolve, and address problems than societies that impose rigid ideological dogmas. Critique of Plato's philosopher king. In the first part of the book, The Spell of Plato, Popper critiques Plato's political philosophy, particularly the idea of the philosopher king, which Popper believes has been misinterpreted and misused by many throughout history. Plato's ideal ruler is a philosopher who understands the nature of justice and is capable of ruling in the best interest of society. However, Popper argues that Plato's concept of the philosopher king leads directly to totalitarianism, because it justifies the concentration of power in the hands of a single ruler or an elite class. Popper contends that Plato's rejection of democracy and his emphasis on the rule of philosopher kings rests on the belief that knowledge of absolute truths could be used to design a perfect society. However, Popper argues that no such absolute truths exist in the social realm, and any attempt to impose a rigid vision of society based on supposed eternal truths is dangerous. Instead of focusing on achieving an ideal society, Popper advocates for a political system in which social arrangements can be continuously improved and critiqued, where rulers can be held accountable, and where people have the freedom to choose their own futures. Hegel and Marx, The Danger of Historical Determinism. In the second part of the book, The High Tide of Prophecy, Popper turns his attention to the ideas of Hegel and Marx. Both thinkers, Popper argues, shared a belief in historical determinism, the idea that history is moving toward a predetermined goal, often described as the realization of freedom or the end of history. Hegel's philosophy, according to Popper, was an attempt to justify the authoritarian state by arguing that the state represents the highest form of human development. Hegel saw history as a rational process through which the state would progressively unfold its potential, leading to the realization of freedom. Popper critiques this view by asserting that it reduces the individual to a mere cog in the machine of history, and that Hegel's emphasis on the state as the highest expression of human freedom is incompatible with the values of a free society. Marx's historical materialism, which builds upon Hegel's dialectical method, posits that history is driven by class struggle, and that society will eventually evolve through stages toward a classless, stateless utopia. While Marx's theory aimed to explain the dynamics of capitalist societies and predict a revolution that would lead to the overthrow of the capitalist system, Popper argues that Marxism, like Hegelianism, is a form of historicism that stifles freedom. Marxist theory, Popper contends, has been used to justify authoritarian regimes, particularly in the Soviet Union, where the state claimed to represent the inevitable course of history. Popper rejects historicism, the idea that history follows a predetermined course, as both unscientific and dangerous. He argues that history is too complex and contingent to be reduced to a set of laws or patterns, and that any attempt to impose a teleological view of history ignores the role of human agency, individual decisions, and the possibility of social change through democratic means. The problem of utopianism. Popper's critique of Plato, Hegel, and Marx is also a critique of utopianism. He argues that all of these thinkers share a belief in the possibility of creating a perfect society. However, Popper warns that the pursuit of utopia, with its emphasis on totalizing systems and absolute goals, often leads to authoritarianism and violence. According to Popper, the attempt to create a perfect society is inherently dangerous because it justifies the suppression of dissent and the use of force to eliminate any obstacles to the realization of the ideal. Instead of striving for an unattainable utopia, Popper advocates for what he calls a piecemeal approach to social reform, in which problems are addressed incrementally and pragmatically, rather than through grand, sweeping ideological visions. This approach, he argues, is more in line with the values of an open society, where individuals are free to experiment, critique, and adjust social arrangements without fear of retribution. The role of science and criticism in the open society. Popper's philosophy of science plays a key role in his political theory. Central to Popper's view of the open society is the idea of critical rationalism, the belief that all knowledge, including political knowledge, is fallible and open to criticism. Just as scientific theories are subject to falsification and revision, so too are political ideas subject to scrutiny and change. Popper believes that an open society is one in which ideas, institutions, and policies are continually tested and revised in the light of new evidence and arguments. This is a crucial distinction between open and closed societies. In closed societies, ideologies are treated as dogmas that cannot be questioned, while in open societies, ideas are constantly debated, challenged, and refined. Conclusion. The Open Society and Its Enemies is a powerful defense of liberal democracy and individual freedom against the totalitarian ideologies that dominated much of the 20th century. Popper's critique of Plato, Hegel, and Marx is grounded in his commitment to the values of open societies: freedom, democracy, and the rejection of authoritarianism. His emphasis on the fallibility of human knowledge and the need for continuous critique and reform remains a cornerstone of his political philosophy. Popper's work is not just a critique of past political theorists, but a call to action for those who seek to protect and promote the values of the open society in the face of ideological extremism. Through its thorough examination of the dangers of historical determinism and utopian thinking, The Open Society and Its Enemies continues to serve as a relevant and thought-provoking guide to understanding the philosophical underpinnings of political freedom.